Hi there everyone, Lars back with a long-awaited, much-anticipated, much-feared review and analysis for not one, not two, but 3 episodes of The Rings of Power Season 2. Yes! Believe it or not, we are finally here. It's incredible that Amazon's absolute waste of $1 billion is back on the screen. And oh boy, do I have some thoughts. Now then, as before, the way that I am going to approach this show is I am going to provide the review of the events from the episodes. I am then going to talk about the canon that has either been used or abused. Then I'm going to talk about how this show works or doesn't work as an original story, because by now it's just really so far removed from Tolkien that that's really probably how we should be looking at it. And then I'm going to talk about what writing advice we as novice authors can glean from what was done well and what was done horribly within the show. That way we may at least be able to profit somewhat from this abuse of Tolkien's Middle-earth. So if you want to hop around to the rage and the vitriol, or you want to jump around to the writing advice, whatever it is that you're looking for in this long review and analysis, then please make sure that you use the timestamps. But with that being said, let's dive into this. So, first off, there's a good reason why 3 episodes were dropped rather than one big episode to woo and wow us. It's because if you take all 3 episodes and you combine them together, something actually happens. Hooray! It's ridiculous to think that in 3 hours plus of television, when you add them all up, even taking out the end credits, the beginning credits, and the recaps, you have just over 3 hours worth of television. That is the original release of the Fellowship of the Ring, right there. That less happens than what happens in the Fellowship of the Ring. Woo! However, to give the show at least some praise, for a change, it looks like the $1 billion budget is actually on the screen. In the last season, a lot of their grandiose, sweeping vistas and beautiful shots looked really fake, and there still are a lot of really fake scenes and shots that if you spend too long looking at them, you'll realize, oh, that's the green screen, that's the volume, that's all fake. None of that actually looks real, as opposed to looking at Rivendell or Lothlorien, where you know it's fantasy, you know it's fake, and yet you want to dive through the screen so that way you can get there because it just looks so incredibly amazing, immersive, and lifelike. But again, you can actually see better. There are now better costumes. There's better quality to some of the shots, and the acting. I do have to say this: the actors are actually acting out their little hearts. Except for the actors for Arondir and Theo, you can tell that they were told your screen time is going to get slashed, and your pay is also probably going to take a little bit of a reduction. Because Arondir looks like a guy who had been told that he was going to be the main character of the series, and then suddenly realized, no, he's been relegated to secondary character in a later episode in a subplot that doesn't matter. And Theo, you can tell that the studio took away his drugs because he is going completely through remission. He's like, yeah, no, what have you done to me? I hate life. How do I get off of this set? And they pointed him in the direction of where he needed to go next on the set, and so he stomped off that way. But I will get to that later, because, oh my gosh, with those two characters, with those 2 actors, it was so bad! It was so bad! But everyone else, actually I have to say, the acting was fairly good. Where stuff was actually going on, I was engaged. Now, as for the events of these episodes, we open up with Sauron, way back in the past, at the beginning of the Second Age, trying to convince a bunch of orcs and Adar that they should follow him, that they should crown him the new King of Darkness, the new Morgoth. and that he will then use them to unite all of Middle-earth because the Valar and everyone else have abandoned them. It is actually a horrible speech for Sauron the Deceiver, the guy who's supposed to be able to sweeten any sort of deal, any sort of temptation with the best of honeys. This was pathetic. But in any case, he delivers his message. Adar betrays him as he's about to coronate him. The orcs bomb rush him, and he manages to kill a handful of orcs before they absolutely slaughter him. And then he releases this weird snowstorm that absolutely blasts their lands, turning it into a frozen wasteland. And hey, I thought that the orcs didn't like the sun. Sauron gave them permanent cloud cover. But no, apparently it's too cold for them. They couldn't live there. So Adar has them all pack on up to go to the Southlands in order to create Mordor, which is still stupid. And also, everyone's now calling the Southlands Mordor. The very first opportunity that they get. There's no concept of time in the show whatsoever. Oh, this is so bad. This is just the beginning. But yeah, so think about this. Adar has actually wasted 2 different areas, and again, he's like, I must have good land with overcast, so that way my orcs, my lovely children, will never have to suffer the dreaded sunlight. Never mind that we're going to need food and stuff like that. Whatever. You could have lived up in the north with this amazing fortification and with ice that would have frozen the armies of the north, because as well as we can understand, back from season 1, Galadriel got an entire army wasted just trying to get up to the north. Adar, you suck. You don't think things through. Sauron, you suck because you are a wimp. You are supposed to be the guy who can smash people all over the place, and you can barely handle a rabble of orcs, and you get killed off like a punk? Oh, but wait! He turns into some goo. Then he turns into a mud worm man, who then travels for 2,000 years across Middle-earth, because that's how slow this mud thing can crawl, all to find one person to eat and assimilate, so that way he can turn himself into Halbrand. Yes, it took him 2,000 years to find a human to transform himself into something else. Otherwise, even what is the Second Age? Is the Second Age only like a handful of years? Is it only like 100 years? It doesn't make any sense. Or when any of this is happening. None of this makes any sense. We have no grounding in the timeline. There is no concept of time. There's no concept of space, traveling. All of that has just been thrown out the window, even more so in this season. But in any case, Sauron assimilates an old woman, transforms himself into Halbrand. Then he falls in line with all of these refugees who are running from Adar. Where on earth are all these people coming from? We keep on finding actually more and more settlements, more quote-unquote kingdoms. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. But now we finally learn how he ended up on the ship where he meets Galadriel. This all happened a handful of days after he became Halbrand. As best as, again, anyone can tell within this show, there are moments where they just say, oh, weeks have passed. Really? Because you're wearing the exact same clothes and it looks like you still have the same smudge on your face from yesterday. Have you not taken a shower? So moving on from the really stupid beginning, we then head on over to Elrond running from Galadriel at long last as Galadriel pursues him for the rings. No, I must have the rings! This scene is utterly ridiculous because Galadriel is obsessed. She looks like an absolute madwoman. She's finally acting the part from season 1. She wants the rings. Why? Not to save her people. No, she wants the rings so she can go down and hunt Sauron. She does not care about her people at all. And then when Elrond presents the rings to Gil-galad and explains how Sauron has deceived them, forces Galadriel to confess, and Gil-galad then really comes to understand, oh, this is what's going on here. We get 2 moments that in one scene, actually I should say 3. We get 3 not so much moments, but reactions. Gil-galad is actually thinking big picture in a way where he's like, okay then, this is all really, really awful. But if this was our last chance to save elvendom on Earth, maybe we need to take the rings. Yes, it is a risk, but it's a risk I'm willing to take because he's thinking about the large picture. He says, if the elves must flee, who is going to protect the men and the dwarves from Sauron's return, which has now been confirmed? Galadriel's like, give me the rings, please. I must go kill Sauron. Yes! And Elrond's like, no! If Sauron had any part in making these rings, it's part of a greater machination. He is the Lord of Schemes. We are falling into some sort of scheme. If we're not careful, everything could go up in the air in the worst way possible. Please, you two, listen to yourselves. They don't listen to him, so he takes the rings and he flings himself off a cliff. And of course he survives. He swims his way on over to Círdan the shipwright, pulling off a feat just the same as Galadriel. So apparently all elves are able to just simply swim the ocean whenever they want. But he swims his way on over to Círdan the shipwright, and he gives Círdan the rings. Círdan, one of the great elven leaders, one of the oldest, one of the wisest, one of the most respected, takes the rings, goes to get rid of them by throwing them into the ocean, and the powers that be, fate, possibly the Valar, send some sort of little bubble up from the ocean, which throws him around in his little boat, and then he reconsiders. Maybe I shouldn't destroy the rings. Maybe I should check them out. So he takes them out, he puts them on, and realizes, oh, there's power to these rings. He then takes the rings back to Gil-galad and presents them. One of the rings falls literally over to Galadriel. Galadriel puts it on. No one is going to question this horrible woman who does not care about anything other than going to kill Sauron, and who has at every single moment possible gone against the orders that have been given to her. This is just absolutely nutcrackers. It makes no sense why anyone lets Galadriel get away with what she gets away with. Gil-galad even at one point is like, yes, you are one of the worst people ever, but I trust you. I trust you. Even though you lied to me, I now trust you. You can continue to use the ring. You can now go and hunt Sauron when the time is right. And, oh, we're getting premonitions from the rings? This is not how the rings work! Gah! The rings, the elven rings, were created by Celebrimbor using the arts of Sauron, but not touched by Sauron's own hand. These rings were created to allow the elven lords to preserve their kingdoms, to preserve the power of their people, not because they're fading from some weird darkness that is corrupting a tree that was never part of Tolkien's lore. No, the only trees that anyone really needs to care about in terms of light and sustainability that really feed the universe were the great trees of Valinor, which Morgoth slew before the First Age. Since then, yes, there have been special trees of great power and of special heritage and lineage, yet those trees do not somehow sustain the life force of the elves. The life force of the elves is a gift from Ilúvatar. It cannot be taken from them. But whatever. Círdan now has one of the rings, Gil-galad has one of the rings, Galadriel has one of the rings, and Gil-galad tells Galadriel that she can go and hunt again for Sauron. But this time she gets finally, quote-unquote, put into her place by being put under the command of Elrond, who will help her in hunting down Sauron, but take lead in this. And you can tell just how pissed off she is at all this, because she does not trust Elrond anymore, because Elrond didn't immediately hand over the rings to her. How dare he? How dare he sullen their friendship this way? Oh my gosh, it's so stupid. Galadriel is the absolute worst. If anything, this show has at least improved by utterly slashing the screen time that she had for these first 3 episodes, because she was beyond insufferable in all of this. Another thing I will say is that at least Gil-galad starts acting a little bit more regal, a little bit more king-like, and says, hey, look, We need to make sure that others within our realm, such as Celebrimbor, know that Sauron's on the loose, so let's make sure that we send a message to him. I'm only going to send one message with barely any guards, because, hey, that's a thing you can do. And so Celebrimbor is never made aware of Sauron's presence because Galadriel never told him the truth. Because Gil-galad and Elrond have to force it out of her because of her pride. And again, why is she then trusted with one of the rings of power? This is stupid. Meanwhile, what's happening? What was Halbrand doing after season 1? Oh, remember how he's dressed up all regal-like he's about to go and about to own Mordor? Sauron has returned? Yeah, he becomes Halbrand again, pretends to be the king of the Southlands, lets himself get captured. He then has a moment in prison where he tells Adar that I know everything about Sauron's return. You just have to let me go on back and figure out exactly where he is and what he's planning next. I will be your mole within Eregion, so that way then you can then go and you can destroy Sauron once and for all. And this is already where so many contradictions, so many little holes in these people's understanding who wrote any of this show just begins to become manifest. If Adar was able to so easily kill Sauron last time, why should he fear Sauron now? He's got a massive army at his back. He doesn't need to worry about Sauron at all because Sauron's a punk. Oh, but wait, no, Sauron has all these incredible powers, which he doesn't use, unless it's convenient to the plot. Whereas the Sauron that is presented to us in the lore uses everything at his disposal to make life absolutely miserable for the good guys. This is not the Sauron of the books by far. Adar was never in the books, so whatever. The thing is that Adar decides to send Sauron in as a mole into Eregion. Meanwhile, Sauron does his whole Prince of the Werewolves and speaks to one of the Chihuahua wargs and gets said Chihuahua warg to eat the really annoying junkie from the previous season. The guy's like, have you heard of him, lad? Have you heard of Sauron? Hey, that guy's finally dead. You know what, though? I'm actually going to kind of miss him because I was looking forward to more junkiness where he's like, hey, have you heard of Sauron? Oh, I need to have a knife and stick it into my arm so that way I can feel evil power flowing into me. Yes, just as a reminder, that was stuff that happened in the first season. Never mind that the weird evil plagues and whatnot have all for some odd reason moved on or are no longer a thing. Yeah, there's a lot of inconsistencies, a lot of stuff that was just conveniently dropped that really... Season 1, you suck. Season 2, you are not off to a great start either. Sure, you may look a little bit better, and the acting's gone up a couple of notches, but the story itself sucks. So Sauron goes as a mole into Eregion. Celebrimbor's like, well, I was told I was never supposed to actually deal with him. Galadriel just said something, so I'm waiting for next words. And he's so dumb. Sauron just decides to literally camp out and stand in the same spot for apparently weeks, because we are told that weeks elsewhere are passing, yet apparently only a couple of days have passed on in Eregion. I'm just going to assume that Sauron literally stood there for weeks, staring longingly up at Celebrimbor's tower, and then finally Celebrimbor comes on out in the middle of a storm with an umbrella that doesn't even work as a proper umbrella because the set designers absolutely suck and decided to make an umbrella that works as a flower that is actually designed by nature to catch rain rather than have rain slide off. Who were these people? Who thought that this was a smart idea? That the scene was going to be so clever, so emotional, when it looks absolutely ridiculous? And Celebrimbor is acting stupid. And why has no one thought that this weird, creepy human who has been standing there for weeks should be allowed to do so? They should have kicked him out the front door, which is literally right there. All it would have taken is for the guards who are around him day and night to pick him up and heave ho Sauron out of Eregion. But no, Celebrimbor finally invites Sauron up into his chambers, where there he performs a bunch of prestidigitation magic tricks right out of D&D, and then has a flippin' Jesus moment where he comes in the clouds out of the furnace dressed like Jesus, and is like, "You shall be the Lord of the Rings." We used the Lord of the Rings, and then Celebrimbor, a couple scenes later, "Oh, we are forging the Rings of Power." Oh yeah, we gotta make sure that we get the Lord of the Rings and the Rings of Power all into the show said, because that's smart, y'all, because it lets you know what you're actually watching, that this is what it is. Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry. I was getting a little bit annoying right there. But that's how it feels. It was such a silly slap in the face. I started laughing. I know that this scene was meant to be like all awe-inspiring and whatnot, but because we know it's Sauron, because he was passing himself off as Halbrand, because everything leading up to this was silly and ridiculous, a scene which is actually well made. I will say this. It's a well-made scene. If this had been done in a different way, it actually would have been very impressive. But because we know what's going on, it is absolutely ridiculous. It made me laugh out loud, especially because of how Jesus-like they decided to make Sauron appear, which fits the whole idea of Anatar, Lord of Gifts. But the thing is that Anatar is supposed to reveal himself to all of the elves, not just to Celebrimbor, and he's supposed to dazzle and wow them all with his beauty and with his knowledge. If you had that kind of a moment to all of the elves of Eregion as Anatar arrives, it'd be like, holy cow, this is a messenger of the Valar. We should absolutely listen to this guy. Which then would have made Galadriel the really odd one in the story, as is canon, to say, no, we should not trust him. And all the elves are like, but this guy's basically like the second coming. We should absolutely listen to him. And it would have made Galadriel way more the hero by feeling, as she does in the actual canon, that no, there's something really wrong with this guy. I just cannot trust him. It's way too honeyed, it's way too sweet, it's way too glamorous and glorious. I do not believe that the Valar actually sent him. No, it's way too glamorous, it's way too glorious, it's way too honeyed, it's way too sweet, it's way too convenient in so many ways. There's no way that the Valar would have actually sent this guy. I just don't trust him. It all just seems too convenient, too contrived, just wrong. That is the approach of Canon Galadriel. That is the approach that we should have gotten here within the show, but no, we don't. Oh man, there's just so many frustrations. But anyway, now Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, who is meant to be Sauron as a mole, reporting back to Adar, which he's not doing, but Adar is still forming a great army anyway. And oh, by the way, Adar was supposed to have sent spies to go after Sauron. Those spies never come into play again, and Adar's just like, well, everything is perfectly fine. I'm now just getting together a massive army, and I'm going to have Damrod the troll show on up. Not like they're like, oh, Damrod, the troll that ate dragons and has killed stone and mountain giants. Oh my! And he just shows up. There's nothing special about this other than there being a troll. Everything with Adar from this point on is just silly and dumb, and is there simply to remind you that there is a brewing battle on the horizon without any feedback from his spy, Halbrand, or the spies of the orcs that he sent, other than cryptic, ooh, maybe it was the orcs that attacked the elven riders. No, obviously not. Because something really weird and creepy is going on. I wonder whose fault that could be. Oh wait, it's Sauron. And Sauron, who has apparently the power to collapse Moria on top of itself. Again, all of this power, he should have been able to just slap all those orcs from there and back again. at the beginning of the season. But no, he got killed like a punk. What the heck is going on? Are we supposed to believe that this is all part of some great scheme and machination? No, we know it isn't, because of the way that Sauron has to humble himself to now pull off his new scheme with the rings and with betraying Adar. It's all just so dumb. And so, speaking about the dwarves, we have the ever-evolving family drama between Durin III and Durin IV. This is actually where, again, the show really shines. The dwarves of Moria are the best part, or more specifically, the family of Durin, because we get real family drama as father and son don't want to talk to each other. They don't want to admit that the other was wrong. Finally, because Durin IV is working in the mines doing basic labor alongside all these bunch of other poor dwarves who are now getting the chance to kind of take it out on royalty. Oh yeah, which is counter to dwarven culture. The dwarves would have been very respectful of Durin for actually getting his hands dirty. But that all aside, and actually it would have been expected for any dwarf to go get their hands dirty because they love doing that stuff. In any case, Durin and Disa begin to realize that there's a lot of problems here within the mountains. Disa and her singers are unable to see the passageways open again after a massive cave-in, which blocks off all of the mirrors that Moria uses in order to provide the sunlight to help them grow their crops. So Durin and Disa decide that one of the best ways that they can help out their people is by trying to establish better trade routes. The problem is that the king has to be the one to establish said trade routes to bring in the supplies that Moria needs. The opportunity presents itself when Celebrimbor and Anatar send an invitation to Durin and to Disa to come to Eregion and meet with them. There, they present the idea of using the rings. New rings now for the dwarves that will allow the dwarves to preserve and beautify their dwarven strongholds and to make them even richer, grander, and more powerful than before. Now, for the ailing dwarves of Moria, this sounds like a great idea to Disa, but Durin is the one who suspects that things are not entirely kosher with Anatar. However, because his people need it, and is a chance to reconcile with his father, Durin IV swallows his pride, goes to his father, tells him of the rings, tells him of the opportunities that they present, but also reveals that he does not trust their source and that he thinks that his father may have been right and that the issues with the elves need to be sorted out by other people and not the dwarves, because doing so might get them embroiled in events that are far beyond their control. And because Elrond has been on the run, Durin IV has been out of contact with the other elves, and he feels like there's something really wrong going on here. This is easily the strongest part of the whole season thus far, is everything that's been happening with the dwarves, Durin's friendship with Elrond, and how he senses that something is very wrong. In fact, easily the best parts of the show, or at least the parts that have had the most gravitas to them, have been everything that's been involving the rings of power. Everything else that's been going on is just mostly fluff. All of the Adar stuff, we could really almost do without. To kick out the whole beginning with Sauron, for crying out loud. It's just so contradictory, so silly, so contrived. It's just absolutely dumb. All the stuff with the Southlands, we could easily just punt off to the side. We don't need it. Focus on what's happening with Moria. This is really cool stuff. Focus on the drama surrounding the elves and the rings. I really do like the stuff that Círdan has to say about the rings. He is easily, again, one of the wisest, and they chose the best actor possible for Círdan. Holy cow, that was great casting! And then they wasted it by wasting great scenes with Círdan and by making him shave. Círdan is supposed to have a long beard. I'm okay with that, with him having a scruffy beard, because I expect that by the end of the Third Age, after thousands and thousands of years, that he will have let that beard grow out nice and long, like what you read at the end of The Return of the King. So at least they got the beard for Círdan right, and before they had him shave it off, which is stupid, but Círdan shows great insights in how he's like, look, the rings have amazing power to them. And based on what you yourself have said, Elrond, Sauron actually never touched these rings himself, meaning that though the process is his, the power is not entirely his either. Never mind all of the mithril nonsense that is non-canonical. And so Círdan then explains to Elrond, in actually a really good, powerful scene, that if we have the chance to save our people and we have this power, then let us use it. And you, Elrond, if you fear that the power that we are using to try to save our people is not safe, then we need someone with an opposing opinion to have their eyes wide and clearly open, who will then be with us, who can then help guide us. And that's actually a really beautiful, great moment, because that helps to then set up Elrond as the wise elf who will provide counsel and leadership in the future, who will have the willpower to resist Sauron and the willpower to use the rings properly when they finally fall into his hands at the end of the Second Age. This is really good writing. This is a really good setup. There you go. Anyone who says that I'm just hating on Rings of Power, here you have it. I really enjoyed the scenes with Círdan. They were so well done. And again, the acting was really good. The actor who portrays Elrond really stepped it up this season. I really enjoyed most of the scenes that he is in. I feel like he is quickly evolving from a naive young herald elf and becoming the kind of hero that he's meant to be. I believe that season 2 is meant to be Elrond's little hero's journey. And if they can pull that off, that should be great. There is a light in all of this darkness. There is actually a small gem of goodness. The problem is that it's surrounded by a bunch of other dumb stuff. And speaking of dumb stuff, all the issues in the Southlands. Woohoo! Oh no, boy, we haven't even gotten to Númenor yet. Oh boy. And don't even get me started on not Gandalf. Anyways, what is going on in the Southlands? Well, after the Númenóreans had completely abandoned Middle-earth for apparently the second time, because according to the Isildur, there's all of these amazing settlements that all just happen to be here, that all the people of the Southlands have been using for 100 years, and because they're such idiots, they never figured out what an aqueduct was, even though apparently there's a perfectly good functioning aqueduct right there for them to use? Ha-ha! Oh, this is so dumb. In any case, the Númenóreans completely abandoned Middle-earth, and Isildur has been taken by apparently young Shelob, most likely, but it's one of Ungoliant's brood, has imprisoned Isildur in this cave where he is meant to become dinner for all of these spiders. But no, his horse, his oh so beloved horse from season 1, escapes Elendil and races after his owner, just like Aragorn's horse did. Yay! Oh, I haven't even talked really much about how almost all of the lines, half of the lines from this show have been appropriated from the Lord of the Rings trilogy by Peter Jackson. In any case, the horse magically finds its way all the way across from the mouth of the Anduin River at the sea, all the way to Mirkwood. Yes! All the way to Mirkwood! And has gone on over there and has picked and helps to save Isildur right before all of the spiders hatch, mummy style, alien style. They eat an orc. Isildur barely makes his way out using an orc scimitar, dealing a wound to the great spider, which really isn't even all that big, and escapes on his trusty steed, rescues a poor defenseless girl who stabs him in the leg, because, yeah, reasons, which he literally walks off. Yes! Once he gets some stitches in him, all of that limping, all of that inflamed flesh, all of that blood loss, he literally walks it off. So, he saves this girl whose name is Astrid, but spelled with an E, so it's Astrid. In any case, he saves Astrid. They fall for a trap where all of these Southlanders who have now decided to join Adar are just laying in wait at various traps to trap other humans whatever's going on here. And then Arondir shows up in a scene that was made specifically to become a trailer moment. Other than that, like, the scene is ridiculous, where Arondir is murdering all of these people with his bow and arrow, and apparently a kidney shot is instantly fatal, and if you stab someone through the cheek with your arrow, it will also instantly kill them. This is even cheesier than some of the deaths from the Fellowship of the Ring. And I love how the creators of the show are like, by the way, we're extremely family friendly. The gore in this scene alone, and the gore also in the opening scene, are absolutely ridiculous, with yet more eye shots and more dismemberment and disfiguration in order to murder people than anything that you would have gotten in Peter Jackson's trilogy. Yay! Family friendly fun. So Arondir saves Isildur, and Astrid takes them on over to the community of refugees from the previous season, and there Bronwyn has been killed off screen. Oh no, the person that everyone cared so much about. And they don't even explain how she died, because the writers are not creative at all. And they're going to now burn her on a funeral pyre like the heathen kings of old. And Arondir cannot bring himself to light her, because as long as this camera is rolling, he might get paid. He's just staring on with the exact same expression he has throughout the entire season. And then Theo comes, is like, I don't care, she didn't mean anything to me, burns his mother, stomps on off, and then complains to Arondir, basically, you took away my sword, I don't have drugs anymore, I hate you, you're not anything to me, you're the worst, go away, everything's your fault, I'm a teenager. And then Isildur decides that it's a good idea to work with this guy to try to get his horse back from the bandits. And Theo's like, goody, this is my chance to run away from home. I'm going to be one of Adar's henchmen. Yay! And because I have my heroin marks, then he's going to take me in. Because I took on the power of the sword by giving it my own blood. I am better than everyone else. And no, I am not exaggerating. That is literally this stupid kid's plan and train of thought. It is spelled out. It is stupid. But Isildur gets his horse. Theo gets kidnapped by something. A lot of people get killed. Who knows what's going on? Cliffhanger! Meanwhile, back at Numenor, what's been going on there? The Numenorians are really angry that a handful of people died during this one raid. You are supposed to be one of the greatest kingdoms in Middle-earth! You are one of the absolute powerhouses! And you are complaining that a handful of people died? Yes, for the families who lost people in the raid, I can understand their being upset. And yet... Muriel's just like, oh, it's totally fine, go ahead, slap me, which one of the women does. Oh, I'm supposed to be blind. She does not look wounded at all. The actress is literally just doing her best impression of the 1,000-yard stare and never blinking as much, or blinking as little as possible to show, I'm blind. This is stupid. You mean to tell me that in a $1 billion plus show, you could not have done the makeup to show some good scarring on her face, or to give her contacts of milky eyes so that way she looks blind, or at least do the CGI that you're so fond of to give her milky eyes so that way she's blind? No. It's just dumb. So after a funeral for the king that no one cares about because we never got to know him back in the previous season, the people are all upset. Elendil's daughter is conspiring with Ar-Pharazôn to depose the queen so that way he can become king, which he becomes king when one of the eagles of Monve shows up for some random reason. Well, it would have been a great opportunity to actually have an eagle speak, since we know that the eagles can actually talk. But no, the eagle just shows up and everyone's like, Ar-Pharazôn's meant to be king! The eagle has shown up at the coronation and has chosen Ar-Pharazôn! Everything that's happening in the Numenorian subplot does not make any sense. Yes, we see that they're trying to set up the conflict between Ar-Pharazôn's people and the faithful, but in this case, the faithful are not the people who are faithful to the Valar, like they actually are in the lore, but instead the faithful to Muriel, who is a horrible queen. She is not a good ruler in the slightest, and whoever's writing her speeches needs to be fired because they are horrible speeches. And Elendil does nothing but basically moan and groan and move around like an old man, and he's apparently now the queen's most trusted advisor. And finally we get a little bit more into Ar-Pharazôn and him being creepy and wanting to marry her, but it's just done so milquetoast that it comes off more just silly creepy rather than actually conniving creepy, which is how it's supposed to be in the books. Really, the stuff that's happening in Numenor is incredibly just forgettable. The only thing that you need to know is that now Ar-Pharazôn is king. Yay! That's all. That's all you need to know. And so now we're set up for whatever's going to happen there. I just do not see this Ar-Pharazôn being the guy who will wrangle Sauron out of Barad-dûr and then take him bound in chains back to Numenor, and then seek to overthrow the Valar. That is not this Ar-Pharazôn, not by a faint breeze or a storm wind. And yes, I know I just made a reference to the Stormlight Archive, so what? And then what's been happening with not Gandalf? Well, he and the hobbits, which they finally dropped their halflings. Yay! Oh, these stupid Harfoots. So, not Gandalf is running off with Nori. They're in the desert. The Sam stand-in follows them all the way there. Isn't that just so sweet? And they need food. Not Gandalf is able to produce food with his magic, meaning that, like, there's literally, I kid you not, a scene setting up for Gandalf and Nori to start singing Hakuna Matata. What a wonderful phrase. Hakuna Matata. Ain't no passing craze. I eat my bugs from this ugly stump. Yeah, sing it, wizard. It's our problem-free philosophy. Because we steal stuff from other properties. That is what's happening in this whole scene. It is so dumb. You can tell that the writers are trying to get all philosophical and metaphysical and really cool with not Gandalf and Nori and the Sam stand-in with Poppy or whatever her name is. And no, it's just dumb. But wait, there is a Saruman lookalike wizard who wants to stop this other wizard. And so he has brought in the moth women who are looking for Sauron, but not really looking for Sauron because, again, none of this makes any sense. He's like, I must get not Gandalf over to me for my vague purposes. But who can do this? And then you have a bunch of steampunk warriors who are all like, we do not belong in Middle-earth because we are steampunk warriors. So if you will let us free when we capture not Gandalf, then you can put us back into the proper genre. And the evil Saruman stand-in wizard, Saruman lookalike, is like, yes! Oh my gosh, that's so perfect! Let me stroke my overly long, luscious beard and go ahead and do. And then they go after not Gandalf. Not Gandalf creates a storm, destroys one of his staffs, and the hobbits are thrown to places unknown. Who cares? We have a cliffhanger! Yeah, there you have it. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I actually spent this much time talking about the events of 3 episodes. Woo! So it sounds like a whole lot's happening. And I actually made it even grander and more fun than it actually is? Woohoo! Yay! Okay. Well, now let's actually get to it. Canon material. Let me say this, and this might be a shocker to some people, but it's actually true. I took down notes. I kept a tally of the lore accuracies for this season. And we have a 100% improval rate over season 1. Yes, believe it or not. Not only are they just using the names and the names of characters, the names of places, as canonical names and places. But Círdan has a beard! At least for a little while, before he shaved it off. That was stupid. Can't have Círdan keep his beard. He looks really good with a beard on. In any case, Círdan has a beard. Why am I making a big deal about that? Because that is something so simple. And I said this a long time ago. I said this when people were complaining about the hairstyles for the elves. And I was just like, look, the showrunners could have easily have hand-waved all this away by saying, hey, look, Círdan has a beard. You don't normally see elves with beards. And so we thought to ourselves, what if we could show a little bit more variety of the elves in Middle-earth by showing them having different kinds of hairstyles and even facial styles? Because, well, Círdan has a beard, so maybe why not some other elves? Why would some of the elves maybe not keep their hair a little bit more short for other reasons, maybe practical purposes? We understand that most of the elves will be looking ethereal and everything, yada yada yada. Use Círdan as your example for why you are changing some things up, because Círdan is a unique elf for having his long beard. So, hey, they had that in there, at least for a little time. That's good. Círdan is indeed a shipwright. Hallelujah. He is the oldest and the most respected elf. And again, they cast him really, really well. So a very fantastic bit of lore accuracy right there. And even though this might seem like an unnecessary freebie to the writers, there are going to be some people who will disagree with me on this. But hey, you know what? I'm going to be a little bit generous to the showrunners here. I'm going to say that the part where Sauron speaks to the Chihuahua warg and gets it to follow his commands is actually a great example of Sauron as the Prince of Werewolves. During the First Age, when Sauron was one of the chief lieutenants of Morgoth and was given his own fortress and a very important charge on keeping an eye on the lands of the elves and the men in order to spy on whatever kinds of preparations they were making to go to war against Morgoth, Sauron brought under his banner mostly werewolves, and he spoke to them in ways that they clearly understood. The werewolves were completely loyal to Sauron. And so just like Sauron is able to influence this warg by speaking to it, yeah, sure, it's meant to be dark magic, and it's because it's Sauron, but I will pass this off as a moment of the Prince of Werewolves. Evidence that yet again you can, without specifically referencing moments from other books, that you can incorporate those moments and those details properly into a story and be respectful to the lore. This was actually a rather good moment, even though it's completely antithetical to so much of what Sauron actually would have done in the real story, where no, he was truly the Lord of Barad-dûr at this time. At least as you're destroying the lore, you could have, at least you gave us this little nuggets. Another good lore accuracy moment is that our Pharazôn is creepily involved with his cousin because he intends to marry her in order to secure the throne of Númenor, which is absolutely against the rules. And we get that in episode 3. Again, it was super milquetoast. It was nowhere near what it should have actually been, but at least they included it. We now know that our Pharazôn is absolutely intending to take his cousin to wife. Ugh. At least they have that in there. So again, another good lore accuracy moment. And yeah, other than that, everything else is completely inaccurate to the lore that Tolkien established. Also, we should applaud them for again pointing out just how important the Great Mirrors of Moria were for bringing light and life into the Dwarven Kingdom. That was very essential for considering just how deep they were down in there. And yes, indeed, Ithilien is made from mithril, or made from at least a good component of mithril and other special silvers and magic in order to produce this great effect that reflects starlight and moonlight. Yay! So we've got some nice little lore accuracy moments all throughout here, plus the names of people and places being accurate for the most part, except for where it's very clear that they've come up with their own fan fiction characters like Theo and Arondir and not Gandalf and Nori and Poppy and the other wizard dude and all that. So, even though it's not much, it's a 100% improvement. Yay. Here is the reason why you need to adhere to the lore from Tolkien, why it is better to not have simply a 100% improvement, but a 1,000,000% improvement in lore accuracy. Think about the contradictions that we're seeing with Sauron. If Sauron's so powerful, why was he able to be beaten so easily by a bunch of punk orcs and Adar? It does not make any sense. Sauron should be incredibly powerful. He should already be in a position of leadership over the orcs. The orcs follow him. All of these machinations and whatnot are meant to make Sauron appear way more intelligent, way more savvy, like a leader who totally usurped power over Middle-earth. The thing is that he is a Maiar. He is a force of nature. He is actually way more terrifying when you realize just how cunning and crafty he is, thinking in the long term, combined with his amazing powers. If he's just a crafty dude who happens to have everything fall into his lap, it doesn't really make him that dangerous. Oh my, he creates these rings. Whoop-de-doo. What do these rings do? When you actually understand what these rings are capable of, that in them they contain the power of preservation over all of Middle-earth. Should Sauron get his hands on these rings, not only can he change the minds of people, he can literally change the entire landscape of Middle-earth. He can control all of it. That is what is at stake here. But that is never properly conveyed because of how they've changed up the lore. So Sauron does not come across as the threat, the all-powerful threat that he should be. No, because they want to have this weird Walter White moment. No, that doesn't work for Sauron, because Sauron's always been large and in charge. Sauron should always have been feared. Sauron is a powerhouse. When Celebrimbor goes against him later on, Sauron lays waste to Eregion. He defies all the power of the elves and the dwarves and requires Numenor to come to their aid in an all-out world war against Sauron. That is incredible, and that is the threat that Sauron poses. And yes, I did forget another bit of lore accuracy. Sorry about that. Maybe just a little bit more than 100% improvement. Celebrimbor will be impaled and killed by Sauron. Galadriel's impression and her vision of what would come is in a way true. Sauron in the lore impales Celebrimbor on his spear and uses his body as a battle standard. That's metal. The thing is that kind of Sauron is not the Sauron that's being presented to us. The Sauron that's being presented to us does not come across in any way as a Dark Lord who can threaten all of Middle-earth. The flaming eyeball from the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings trilogy is more intimidating, more convincing, more evil, more devious, more dangerous than a Sauron that's been presented to us in a season and 3 episodes. I am not if I only had to go off of the Rings of Power, I am not convinced that Sauron is the big threat that Galadriel insists that he is. And Galadriel continues to be an absolutely awful character. By completely veering away from her canon personality, I have no reason whatsoever to support this character. And that's sad because Galadriel is one of the best. And if I do not like one of your main characters who's supposed to be one of the best of us, then what are we even doing here? The canon is just being absolutely violated up and down, left, right. It's just awful. Poor Tolkien is spinning in his grave, and as other people have said, and I absolutely agree, if you were to attach the proper kinds of receivers and generators to Tolkien's grave, you could power all of the UK on clean energy. And the fact of the matter is that because we've been jumping around to all these little fan fiction places here and there, and we have not been focusing on the important stuff, which is the drama surrounding the Rings of Power, like I said earlier, the best parts of this show are when we're actually focusing on the rings and on the Dwarves of Moria. But because we spend more time elsewhere, the show feels like it's not going anywhere. What really are these Rings of Power? What are the threats that they pose, or the promises that they pose? We're not getting any of that. As a result, this does not feel like a show about the Rings of Power. This feels like a meandering mess. And the reason why this is happening, really stems back to the fact that we've stepped away from the canon and we're doing whatever weird nonsense that the showrunners have wanted to do now for a long time, which does not fit in at all with the story that Tolkien wrote. This is why adhering to the canon is so important. When I've been blamed for being a purist, which I'm not. I've already said how much I love the Lord of the Rings trilogy. It's one of the best 3 movies ever made. And yet, because I actually have read the books multiple times, I have read the extended lore, I can tell you just how inaccurate those movies are to the works of Tolkien. They are still great movies, because they adhere as much to the lore as possible. They still stick to the main story and try to keep the characters as true to who they were as possible, all except for Aragorn, really, and making Gimli a little bit more of a comic relief character than he ever was in the books. But comic relief and Aragorn's hero's journey aside, the rest of the characters are very, very accurate, at least the core characters of the Fellowship. Faramir has a bit of an interesting introduction and whatnot, but all of that aside, one of these days we'll actually have to have a good conversation about the adaptative choices that were made in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, because we can understand what's going on there. But making Guy Ladriel, and just having her be obsessed with killing Sauron, like, it's so dumb. And what they've done with the Palantiri, what they've done with the rings, and how the rings now act completely different. What's even the reason for having these? Why then do we need the mirror of Galadriel when Galadriel can just use her ring? Yay! No, that's not what the ring is meant for! Their desecration of the canon makes it so that their story meanders more than it should, and they are then stuck with really writing their own story. If you're going to adapt anything, you need to be honorable to the canon, because it's going to keep people like me, as a fan of the original, way more invested and interested, because I want to see what you're going to do. And when you do it well, I will praise you and I will love you for it. When it's very clear that you wanted to do something different, I ask, why don't you just write your own story? To which then, let's ask ourselves, how does this work as its own individual story? Well, I will tell you this up front. Even though it takes 3 episodes to really get much of anything done, this is better than what we got in season 1. This is actually an improvement. Not much of an improvement, but it is an improvement. So, let me say what I feel was done really well. Minimizing Galadriel's time on screen, taking one of the most annoying, aggressively annoying, stupid, horrible characters, and punting her to the side. It was so great that we got so little of her. It's also really great that we got so little of Adar. Even though I think Adar was actually done better this season, Adar is also just kind of stupid. Having less of him actually made more of him, and that was great. Having Elrond be an actual hero was good. Yes, we aren't quite there yet. This is just the beginning of his hero's journey, truly. But having Elrond finally stand up to Galadriel and stand up to King Gil-galad, and even after he's been beaten, holding true to his principles, but learning and listening to Círdan, that shows strength of character, that shows wisdom, that shows humility. The writers were able to actually communicate a lot about Elrond in these episodes. Elrond feels like a far more fleshed out character. And the family dynamic between Durin III and Durin IV and Disa was wonderful. It was a great family drama. I felt like it worked really well. If I were to completely divorce this away from Lord of the Rings and just focus on what we see right here, I can understand this. When families fight, it can be awful. Unless you are a family that's learned how to kiss and make up and come back together as a unit, it is difficult to admit when you're wrong. It is difficult, even if you're in the right, even if you know that what you did was right, to set your pride aside and do what is right by your family. That takes real courage. That takes real strength of character. And Durin IV proves himself to be a wonderful man because of what he does. And Disa is a great supporting character as a patriot to her kingdom, as a supportive wife, and as her own independent woman. Disa was actually done very well. I know that a lot of people don't like her character because of what the actress herself has said, but honestly, the work was done really well. And there's actually, interestingly, 3 different moments here in this show so far, in the second season, that are the creators, the showrunners, the writers, speaking to us directly. And I found that to be very, very interesting. The first of which, that really pops out in my mind, is when Círdan is talking with Elrond about the works of one of the great elven poets who turned out to be an absolute drunk, and that he was absolutely awful to be around. That he was a horrible person, but that his work, his poetry, his singing was so beautiful it could make the sun weep. And he then tells Elrond, judge the work, not the artist. To which then I say, as a creator, I actually agree with that. And that is why I am judging your work here, right? Here, writers. There's a reason why this video is over an hour long. Because there's so much awfulness to talk about. Gah! Your work is awful! But that was actually a good moment. And then when Annatar, or at that point he's still kind of masquerading as Halbrand, is speaking with Celebrimbor and says how other people above them take credit for their work. This is something that is huge within Hollywood, where the producers and the studio owners are the ones who claim the real power, the real victory for the works of their creative and ingenious writers, directors, and the people who work in the various crews. In order to make any movie work, it takes everyone bringing their A game to make the best movie possible. And it's one of the reasons why people love looking at the works and all of the special featurettes for the extended editions of Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, because you get to see all of these amazing artists and filmmakers strut their stuff and show their love for their craft and their love for the movie. And you actually got to see a little bit more of that leading up to Season 2 for The Rings of Power. Just how many people did enjoy working on this series. And I think that that's also actually a very good and important message to be shared right there. That it takes a large community to make any sort of creative process get off of its feet and take off running, and that it's always the people at the very top who claim all of the victory and then can dish out the punishments if there's any kind of failure, because they never lose because they are the ones empowered and in control. This is the way that the world works, unfortunately, and it was a pretty good little call out to reality, a nice little reflective moment for the creators right there. But then again, still, this does not absolve the creators of the things that they themselves have deliberately done, because the showrunners, J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay, and all the writers under them have consciously gone through the lore of Tolkien's Middle-earth and have rejected it and defiled it. They made that choice. They did it very knowingly, and them writing that scene in there does not absolve them of the things that they have done. And then finally, to say that being creative requires destruction, I see what you guys are saying right there. That you are destroying Tolkien's lore in order to create this amazing work of yours. No, it sucks. However, there is destruction in writing. You will, as a writer, have to kill your darlings. In your editing process, some of the ideas that you really loved will get kicked to the wayside. The vision that you might have had will not be the vision that sometimes gets preserved all the way to the final draft. That's not the way that it goes. So, yeah, there you have it. But as an independent work, again, the story of Elrond and the story of Durin and his family works out really well. The story of Isildur is nothing but a bunch of, and then happened, and then this 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 happened. Oh, it's so dumb. And the subplots of Numenor and of not Gandalf could be dropped from this story, and nothing of value would be lost. If you are going to do the story of Ar-Pharazôn's rise to power, it needs to be done in a way that feels more convincing. Literally, a coup happens because of Elendil's daughter stealing a Palantir, and his son getting drunk and saying some inflammatory things, And another rich guy saying, you could be king. Oh, what if an eagle shows up? Ooh, an eagle showed up. Everything is now perfect so I can become king. This is one of the weakest coups imaginable. I was laughing because it was so lackluster. The cinematography was all there, the music, but the setup was stupid. The dialogue was awful. We have no real understanding in this original story of how the politics of Numenor work. So, as far as I know, any Tom, Dick, or Jerry, or a Jane could come off the streets of Numenor and make themselves king or queen if a flippin' eagle shows up on their balcony. Yes, according to the story, that could happen. And that's stupid. They did not think this through. And what on earth are they doing with the steampunk warriors and the other wizard and with not Gandalf and the halflings? Who knows? None of that actually makes any sense. That entire subplot was nothing more than a waste of time thus far. Alright, it needs to be better established. You need to concretely believe that these characters have an actual goal in mind and that they know where they're going, rather than giving us a desert version of Sam and Frodo's journey through Emyn Muil into the Dead Marshes, which is literally what they've done. This is so dumb. If you're going to this whole thing felt like a parody, an unfunny parody of the Lord of the Rings. That's what the original material felt like. And it was just dumb. And so here's actually what I would say, that as an original story, while there are some great little character arcs happening, I feel like as an original story, the Rings of Power doesn't know what it wants to be, and then because it's always jumping around from character to character, from place to place, it continues to break up its pacing in the worst ways possible. And so you'd never actually get to spend enough time or the right time with any of these characters. Furthermore, with all this jumping around, we have no understanding of distance, of time. As a result, everything feels like it's literally happened within the same week or even the same day, and yet we are told that weeks and months have passed. But you cannot tell that. So finally, this leads me to my writing advice. What can we take away from this absolute abomination that is playing out before us? What can we do with it? Here is my answer. This is my response. What can we possibly learn from these first 3 episodes? So, one of the things I can say that they have learned is this. Do not rely on your first draft. This did not feel like a first draft show like the first season. The dialogue has slightly improved. Some of the characters have improved. So I will say that. That's good. This feels like a second draft. Congratulations, you've done better than your first season. But your second draft is also not going to be your best draft. And usually also not your third. You want to have a number of drafts under your belt so that way you have thoroughly purged your work of its worst qualities and have done your best to refine everything that is good within it. I'm not really getting that from this season thus far. So it is an improvement. Make sure that you have more than just a first draft, but also understand that your second draft, while it's going to be better than your first, is not the best that your book can be. This leads, though, to the question, when is the story the best that it can be? Well, you can always work on improving your story, but at some point you're going to have to say, this is the best that I can do with my skill. And by relying on other people to give you excellent feedback and critique and advice, you can then still improve even more beyond that. But at some point you must say, this is the best that it can be with the skills that I have and with the resources that I have available. I personally, if you're going to look for a number, I would say you want to have 5 or 6 honest drafts. When I say honest, I mean that you're giving it your honest best shot, that you're not just simply reading through to find the spelling errors. No, that you're honestly trying to make it the best that it can be from draft to draft. If you do that for about 5 or 6 drafts, I think that that's the point where you've reached your limit, where you've exhausted yourself and you've done the best that you can do with that story. When you become more skilled as an author and as a creator, maybe 4 drafts, but that's going to end up being your call. There is no formula for how many drafts it takes to make a great story. Just know that it takes way more than your first draft, and that your second draft isn't perfection either. The next bit of writing advice I will give is this: pacing. Pacing is incredibly difficult. Why? Because pacing will always depend from story to story, from chapter to chapter, from scene to scene. But one of the ways that you can best monitor your pacing is this. Think of each scene as its own little mini story. Within a show or within a movie, let's though talk books right here. Talk about chapters. Each chapter, or in the case of the Rings of Power, each time that we flip on over to a different character should be a different chapter. Each chapter of your story needs to be its own little mini story that tells something completely concrete, beginning, middle, and end. And by its end, has wrapped up everything you need to for that chapter and has then progressed on the rest of the story. You do not see that in most of the Rings of Power, with the exception of Elrond's story and Durin's story, because each one of those moments tells a very concise, confined little mini story that shows Elrond and Durin's family progressing along little mini steps in their arcs, which then have an end and set up the rest of the story to move forward and set them up for their next chapter. That is solid writing advice. Treat each chapter like its own little mini story with a beginning, middle, and end that when it wraps up, it's done, but then continues to progress the rest of the story forward, leading us into the next chapter. If you can think about it that way, that will not only make your chapters a whole lot stronger, but it might also help you control the pacing of your story a whole lot better. Another thing is this. If you're going to have a sprawling, massive story like Rings of Power with so many different important characters and main characters, we need to know who they are. They need to be properly identifiable to us. I forgot Poppy's name, for crying out loud. We have to know who on earth these characters are. And not just simply like, oh, this is the Frodo and Sam knockoff. No, who is Poppy? I don't know who Poppy is. I don't really know who Nori is. And everything about the Harfoots is just stupid. We don't even have a name for the wizard yet. This is actually dumb. At least have some sort of name that he feels like he can use. Even though, like, he says, well, the name just isn't mine yet. It has to be the right name. At least have a placeholder, for crying out loud. Just call him Wizard or Hey You or something. Oh my gosh, at least have your names for characters. Have things that apply to those names so that way these characters stand out to you. Galadriel, we know, is just an awful, horrible human, or elf being, I should say, an awful elf being. Ugh. Gil-galad actually got some characterization here in the story, which is good. Círdan definitely came across nice and strong. Elrond now has a good developing character. Durin has come back really good and strong, so has Disa. You need to know who these characters are. You need to convey enough feeling, enough emotion, enough of their characteristics, so that way the audience can immediately attach names to characteristics. They need to pop out a little bit. And also, it helps to repeat the names of some of these characters a little bit more often, rather than just once or twice, and then reply on he, she, its for the rest of any sort of identifiers for them. No, names. Names are important. Here's another bit of writing advice. I said that the dialogue had improved, and it has. It's still stupidly Shakespearean. Your characters are not Shakespearean characters, unless what you're trying to write is a Shakespearean play. Unless you're writing a Shakespearean play, write your character speaking like they should within that environment. If you're in the hood, they better be speaking like they're characters from the hood. If they're speaking in a medieval context, then at least have them speaking in a way that sounds familiar to us but still adheres to some sort of medieval standard. If they're supposed to be speaking in high society, they should be speaking like they're in high society. If they are speaking from a different country, different foreign land, then they should be using that. For instance, having characters flip-flop between speaking English and speaking Elvish back and forth in the same scene willy-nilly is stupid. They should not be talking that way. No, they should be talking in a way that makes absolute sense. If you want elves to argue with each other in Elvish, and that actually sounds really cool to me, then have them argue in Elvish. That's totally fine. But if you fear that the audience is going to be lost because they have to read a bunch of subtitles, then have them speak regular language. Have them speak common, for crying out loud. So please, please, read your dialogue out loud that you've written. Please do that. I know it's going to be It's going to be super embarrassing, but you need to hear how it sounds. And as I've heard other people say, the writers for this show just wrote out a bunch of stuff that they thought sounded really cool, and that they only wanted to hear it from the actors, like, oh, doesn't it sound so great? Rather than actually having themselves say it and try to make it work, like, oh my gosh, no, this sounds so clunky. Oh, this dialogue is absolutely awful. Dialogue is hard to write. It takes a lot of editing. It takes having to read it out loud, but it can be done, and it will do wonders for your work. Whew, okay then, so this video has already gone on pretty long. There's so much more that can be talked about, but in all honesty, maybe for a live stream, maybe for other videos, but wow, watching over 3 hours of the Rings of Power back to back to back was a lot. It's been exhausting, and there's so much that just, this isn't Tolkien's work. This is bad fan fiction. It's insulting, actually, really, on so many levels. Well, I was laughing, I was ugly cackling, I had so many come on moments. Everything with the Harfoots was stupid. It could have been gotten rid of. The Númenórean subplot was dumb as can be. The Southland stuff had me rolling my eyes and rolling with laughter because it was absolutely abysmal on so many levels. It was parody. Everything with Galadriel was awful. At least we had Elrond and everything happening in Moria to pull us through. And I am slightly intrigued to see what's going to happen with Celebrimbor and with Anatar / Sauron. The problem is that it was so stupidly written in order for them to shoehorn in actual canon events after spitting on the canon, burning it, and sprinkling its ashes as far away as they possibly could, and then realizing, oh, holy crap, we actually need that because that's the only way of making sense. How the heck you have the Lord of Gifts showing up and teaching Celebrimbor how to make the other rings? Gah! Oh, it's just so dumb! Gah! Duh! Yes, there you go. That's how I felt watching these 3 episodes. I did my absolute best to keep my cool. Whew. Okay, now that I have let it on out, and I'm done with this, if you want more writing insights, reviews, analyses, and rants, then please check out our many videos here on our YouTube channel. And if you'd like to support the work that we do and actually read some books that are real fun, then please check out the books that we have published. Links for them are in the description below. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us on this incredible adventure that we call writing, even if we sometimes must slog through the soupy swamps of horrible fan fiction known as Rings of Power. This is an adventure that is way better with friends, so thank you so much for accompanying me as I lose my mind. And until the next video, y'all, tschüss.